Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, well, it's to give you a real shortcut to understanding what's happening in 1 Kings chapter 15. It's arguably one of the most volatile and theologically packed chapters in ancient Israelite history.
It really is. We're landing right in the middle of this incredibly tense period, the divided monarchy.
Yeah, kicking off around 930 BCE.
Exactly. And our goal isn't just to, list the kings. We want to unpack the lens this was all recorded through. The historian here is constantly asking this question. How did these kings, their alliances, their family decisions, their wars, how did all that stack up against their faithfulness or, well, their lack of faithfulness to the covenant with Yahweh?
Right. So we're tracking not just the history, but the spiritual side, the psychological stuff, even the cultural impact. And looking at these constants, you've got the cycle of sin, God's sovereignty playing out, and maybe surprisingly, the influence of the women, especially the mothers, behind the scenes.
That's a huge part of it. We'll go verse by verse, really digging into everything from, a pretty brutal political assassination that the text frames as divine judgment,
all the way to deposing a queen mother, which was revolutionary.
Yeah.
And then there's the story of this great reformer who, well, eventually compromises.
And you see this tension throughout. In Judah the South, there's this underlying theme of continuity, protection, God's faithfulness, holding things together.
Even when the kings mess up.
Right. But then in Israel, the North, it's just chaos, judgment, rebellion. It's a stark contrast. Every king gets measured against David. So this chapter becomes this profound study in leadership, the good, the bad, and the stuff with eternal weight.
Okay, let's kick things off in the south, in Judah, with King Abijam. His reign is short, just 3 years, but it really sets the stage for understanding God's bigger plan here.
It does. He takes the throne in Jerusalem, and the text is very specific. It's the 18th year of Jeroboam's reign up in Israel.
That dating, linking the two kingdoms, that's deliberate, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's called synchronistic dating. The historian uses it constantly. It's a literary technique, really, to remind you, the reader, that even though they're split politically, maybe even at war, theologically they're still meant to be one people under God's covenant.
And his name, Abijah. Sometimes it's Abijah.
Right. Different manuscripts have slightly different spellings. Abijah actually means Yahweh is my father, which, when you look at his record, is deeply ironic.
Yeah, let's get into that. His background, specifically his mother, this is where the influence of women at court, particularly the queen mother, starts to become really important. His father's Rehoboam, Solomon's son. But his mother's name, Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. What's the significance there? Okay,
this is crucial. First, just the fact that the mother's name is consistently listed for the Davidic kings is significant. It points to the formal power of the Jabura, the queen mother.
She wasn't just like the king's mom hanging around the palace.
Not at all. She held a recognized office. Often she was a major advisor, controlled property, had political clout, sometimes even more secure in her position than the king's current wife. It's a unique feature of the Judean court.
And the Abishalom connection. Daughter of Abishalom.
That most likely links her back to Absalom, David's rebellious son. Now, that doesn't automatically mean she was bad, but it suggests she came from a powerful, perhaps politically ambitious family line within the broader Davidic network, a line that maybe wasn't always aligned with pure Yahwism, possibly connected to factions that tolerated or even encouraged syncretism.
So potential for trouble right there in the family tree.
Potentially, yes. And it sets up what we see later with her grandson, Asa.
Okay, so Abijam takes the throne. Verse 3 gives his evaluation, and it's not good.
No, it's pretty damning. He committed all the sins his father had done before him.
So we're talking about the idolatry Rehoboam allowed or even promoted, the high places, the sacred pillars, the Asherah poles, maybe even the shrine prostitutes.
Exactly. The whole package of syncretistic worship that blended Yahweh worship with Canaanite fertility practices, stuff that had crept in under Solomon and really flourished under Rehoboam, Abijam just kept it going.
The text says his heart was not perfect or not fully devoted to the Lord, unlike David. What does that fully devoted really mean in this context?
It's about wholehearted loyalty. It doesn't mean David was sinless, obviously, but David's fundamental orientation, his core allegiance, was to Yahweh alone. Abijam, like his father, seems to have practiced a kind of nominal Yahwism.
Like going through the motions at the temple in Jerusalem.
Right, maintaining the official cult, but at the same time allowing or maybe participating in these other religious practices on the side. It's compromise. It's trying to serve two masters, which the covenant forbids.
But then, Right after this negative judgment, we get verse 4, and this is maybe the theological core of the whole chapter. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord, his God, gave him a lamp in Jerusalem. That nevertheless...
Oh, wow. That's grace right there. Pure, unadulterated grace cutting through the judgment he deserved. It's one of the most powerful nevertheless moments in the Bible. It signals God's faithfulness overriding human failure.
Let's really unpack that lamp, the Hebrew word ner. It's more than just keeping the lights on, isn't it?
Oh, much more. It's a direct echo of God's covenant promise to David back in 2 Samuel 7. The ner symbolizes the dynasty itself. It's the promise that David's line will not be extinguished. There will always be a legitimate heir on the throne in Jerusalem.
So it's a legal and theological symbol of continuity.
Precisely. In the ancient Near East, putting out someone's lamp meant destroying their family line, ending their legacy. God is saying, no matter how badly Abijam behaves, I will not put out David's lamp. It guarantees the survival of the dynasty, securing that messianic line ultimately.
So Abijam's personal wickedness doesn't derail God's overarching redemptive plan. The dynasty itself is secure because of God's promise to David, not because of Abijam's merit.
That's the key distinction. It's an unconditional promise regarding the dynasty, even if individual kings within that dynasty face judgment for their actions. This grace-based security for Judah is what contrasts so sharply with the situation in the north. The lamp represents hope, legitimacy, and the future promise.
And to drive this point home, the writer immediately reminds us why David is the standard in verse 5. He did what was right all the days of his life. But then comes that very specific exception, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Why single that out?
It's brilliant, really. First, it shows incredible honesty. The Bible doesn't whitewash its heroes. David messed up terribly: adultery, murder, abuse of power. It was horrific.
So acknowledges his sin, but...
But two crucial things. One, David repented deeply, genuinely, and Psalm 51 is the classic expression of that. Two, and this is critical for the historian's point here, David never turned to idolatry. He never fundamentally broke the first commandment. His heart, despite his massive moral failure with Bathsheba and Uriah, remained oriented towards Yahweh and his covenant.
So he's the standard not because he was perfect, but because his foundational loyalty was right, and he knew how to repent.
Exactly. Abijam, on the other hand, perpetuated systemic idolatry. That's the core difference. David's sin was personal, horrific, but he repented. Abijam's sin was structural, theological, and seemingly unrepentant.
And this short 3-year reign was also marked by something else. Constant war between Abijam and Jeroboam.
Yes, perpetual civil war, brother fighting brother. A tragic, ongoing consequence of the kingdom splitting. Just a constant drain of resources and lives.
So Abijam dies. He's buried in the city of David, which itself confirms the lamp is still lit, the promise holds, and his son Asa takes over. We see the pattern, a flawed king, but God's covenant promise endures and the succession continues in Judah.
That's the rhythm in the south. Now let's brace ourselves for the north.
Okay, shifting gears dramatically. We head north, across the border to Israel, where things are a lot less stable. While David's lamp flickers but stays lit in Jerusalem, the north lacks that covenant anchor. Let's see what happens with Nadab.
Nadab is Jeroboam's son. He inherits the throne, but critically, he inherits his father's legacy of sin. The state-sponsored idolatry, those golden calves at Dan and Bethel, that's the poison chalice he drinks from.
He only lasts 2 years, starting in Asa's second year down in Judah. And his report card.
Short, sharp, and negative. Verse 26. He did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father, continuing the sin Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. No deviation, no reform.
It's important to keep hammering this point about the golden calves.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a minor liturgical tweak, was it?
Not at all. Jeroboam's motive might have been political, keep people from going to Jerusalem to worship, but the method was catastrophic. Using idols, even supposedly representing Yahweh, was a fundamental violation of the covenant, specifically the second commandment. It institutionalized rebellion against God's revealed will.
And Nadab just kept it going.
He did, and that underlying spiritual corruption, that structural sin, essentially guarantees political instability in the north. You just can't build a lasting house on a rotten foundation.
And instability is exactly what they get. Almost immediately, right? Enter Baasha.
Right. Baasha, son of Abijah, from the tribe of Issachar, notice, not from Ephraim like Jeroboam. So a different faction conspires against Nadab. And he doesn't wait for a quiet moment. He assassinates Nadab during a military campaign.
Where does this happen? The location seems significant.
It's at Gibbethon, a Philistine town. The Israelite army under King Nadab is actually besieging it, trying to exert control or maybe reclaim territory.
So the king gets murdered by one of his own commanders while supposedly leading the nation against an external enemy.
Precisely. It speaks volumes about the internal rot. The kingdom is so fractured, the ambitions so rife, that political rivals are more dangerous than the Philistines at the gate. Loyalty is non-existent. They can't even maintain a united front for national defense because they're too busy plotting against each other.
Baasha sees his chance and takes it.
And he doesn't just take the throne, he makes sure no one from Jeroboam's line can ever challenge him. His next move is absolutely brutal.
Verse 29.
He immediately wiped out the entire household of Jeroboam. He did not leave Jeroboam anyone that breathed. Total extermination. This is ruthless consolidation of power, standard practice for usurpers in the ancient Near East maybe, but incredibly violent.
But the writer sees more than just politics here, doesn't he? He connects this massacre directly to prophecy.
Yes, this is a huge theological point for the Deuteronomistic historian. This horrific act, carried out by a self-serving, ambitious murderer, is presented as the direct fulfillment of the prophecy given years before by Abijah the prophet from Shiloh.
Back in chapter 14, God had condemned Jeroboam through Abijah, promising judgment on his house precisely because of the idolatry.
Exactly. So the historian wants us to see God's sovereign hand at work, even through wicked human agents. God uses Baasha's ambition and brutality as the instrument to bring about the promised judgment on Jeroboam's dynasty for its foundational sin.
It's a chilling example of divine retribution. God's prophetic word is active, it shapes history, and it will be fulfilled sometimes through very unsavory means.
It shows that God's justice doesn't depend on the moral purity of the instrument he uses. Baasha is acting out of greed and violence, but he unwittingly becomes the tool of divine judgment.
So Baasha gets the throne, seemingly fulfilling prophecy. You'd think maybe he'd learn a lesson, right?
Yeah.
See what happens when you lead Israel into idolatry.
You would think. But here's the stunning irony, the profound psychological and spiritual blindness. Baasha takes the throne, having just acted as God's judgment against Jeroboam's idolatry.
And what does he do?
He immediately turns around and does the exact same thing. Verse 4 says he walked in the way of Jeroboam in his sin. He keeps the golden calves. He continues the state-sponsored idolatry.
How is that even possible? How could he not connect the dots?
It's a classic case of seeing the political opportunity but missing the spiritual reality. He likely thought the problem was Jeroboam the man, or maybe Jeroboam's dynasty. He probably saw wiping them out as fulfilling the prophecy and thus legitimizing his own claim to the throne.
So he thought he could somehow carry out God's judgment while simultaneously embracing the very sin that caused the judgment in the first place.
It seems so. He confused being an instrument of judgment with receiving God's blessing or approval. He failed to understand that the system of idolatry was the core issue, not just the person who started it. He secures his power, but he sows the seeds of his own dynasty's destruction by repeating the same fatal error.
So he settles in for a long reign, 24 years, ruling from Tirzah, which was the northern capital at that time. But it's a reign marked by the same evil, the same idolatry, and, as we'll see, continued conflict with Judah. The cycle of sin and instability just keeps churning in the north.
Exactly. No covenant anchor, no ner. Just human ambition leading to violence, judgment, and more sin. It's a tragic trajectory.
Okay, let's swing back south again to Judah, where the Davidic lamp, however dimly it might flicker at times, is still burning. Asa, Abijam's son, takes the throne, and his reign is long 41 years. That length itself usually signals something positive, doesn't it?
It really does. In Kings, a long reign often correlates with stability and usually a measure of divine favor, or at least adherence to the covenant compared to the chaos up north. And Asa starts strong. He breaks the negative pattern set by his father Abijam and grandfather Rehoboam.
The evaluation is striking. Verse 11. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. That's high praise, putting him in the Davidic category.
It is. It shows that generational sin isn't deterministic. You can break the cycle, even when you inherit a system corrupted by your immediate predecessors. Asa makes a conscious choice to realign Judah with the covenant standard.
And he doesn't just think about it, he acts. His reforms are described as quite radical, a real spiritual cleansing. What specific things did he do?
Well, first, verse 12 says he banished the shrine prostitutes from the land. These were the Kashem male cult prostitutes involved in Canaanite fertility rituals, likely associated with Baal and Asherah worship.
So this is a direct confrontation with practices that mix sex and religion, trying to manipulate the gods for fertility.
Exactly. Their presence signaled deep syncretism and moral corruption, probably justified by claiming it helped ensure good harvests or livestock fertility. Asa said, "No more. This is a public statement about sexual ethics and religious purity."
He also removed all the idols his ancestors had made. That sounds like digging deep into established tradition.
It does. These weren't just new fads. These were idols potentially dating back generations, maybe even to Solomon's later years. It shows reform often means confronting things that have become comfortable, familiar, even part of the established landscape.
But the most dramatic action, the one that must have caused a huge stir, involved his own family, the Maacah showdown.
Ah, yes. This is peak Asa, the height of his reforming zeal and courage. Verse 13. He deposed his grandmother Maacah from her position as Queen Mother the Gebirah.
We touched on the Gebirah earlier. Remind us why deposing her was such a massive deal, politically and culturally.
Okay, in Judah, the Queen Mother wasn't just an honorary title. She held a formal, powerful office. Think First Lady, plus Dowager Empress, plus maybe head of the National Endowment for the Arts, all rolled into one. She had her own estate, influence, patrons, possibly cultic roles. She was often seen as the embodiment of dynastic continuity.
So firing your grandma wasn't just awkward family dinner conversation. It was a major political upheaval.
Huge. It was Asa essentially saying, my loyalty to Yahweh and his covenant comes before even the highest ranking member of my own family, before political stability, before tradition. It was a painful, necessary break, prioritizing spiritual purity over filial piety or political expediency.
And what was Maacah's specific offense that prompted this?
She had made a repulsive image or an obscene image. The Hebrew word miflitzeth suggests something truly horrific or abominable for Asherah.
Asherah, the Canaanite fertility goddess. So the Queen Mother herself was actively promoting the worship of a foreign deity, likely with a major offensive idol.
Precisely. This wasn't subtle. This was high-level, officially sanctioned idolatry, promoted by the most powerful woman in the kingdom, possibly even within the royal precincts. It showed just how deeply ingrained the syncretism had become, reaching the very top.
And Asa's response?
Yeah.
He didn't just tell her to stop.
No, he took decisive public action. He cut down this repulsive Asherah image or pole, and then he burned it in the Kidron Valley.
The Kidron Valley.
Yeah.
That was basically Jerusalem's garbage dump, right? Where refuse was burned.
Exactly. Burning it, there was an act of ultimate desecration and purification. It symbolized treating this idol as worthless filth, publicly shaming the goddess and the practice, and removing its polluting influence from the sacred city. A very powerful symbolic act of cleansing.
This really highlights Asa's initial courage and commitment. It took guts.
Absolutely. Confronting family, especially someone as powerful as the Queen Mother, is often harder than confronting external enemies.
But, as often happens in these stories, there's a however. The reform wasn't total, was it?
No, and the historian is careful to note this nuance in verse 14. But the high places were not removed.
Why not? If he could take down his own grandmother's idol, why leave the high places standing? What were these exactly?
The high places were local shrines, often on hilltops, used for sacrifice and worship. Some might have been dedicated to Yahweh, but they existed outside the authorized central sanctuary in Jerusalem, violating the principle laid down in Deuteronomy. Others were likely sites of pagan worship.
So why didn't Asa get rid of them?
It's hard to say for sure. Maybe they were just too numerous, too popular, too embedded in local traditions. It's one thing to make a decisive move against a single target in the capital, like Maacah's idol. It's another to root out centuries of localized religious practice across the entire countryside.
It shows the difficulty of complete reform, even for a zealous king.
I think so. It highlights that even the best human reformers often fall short of total eradication of sin or compromise. There are always lingering issues, blind spots, or maybe areas where the political or social cost seems too high. It foreshadows the need for a deeper, more perfect cleansing later.
Despite that incompleteness, Asa does show his positive commitment by bringing silver and gold, things he and his father had dedicated, back into the temple treasury, reinvesting in true worship.
Yes, a sign of renewed focus on the legitimate sanctuary and its needs after years of neglect or misuse of resources. So Asa's early reign is marked by real faithfulness, courage, and significant reform.
But then, war clouds gather again. The conflict with Israel flares up.
Right. The war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, lasted all their days, the text reminds us, and Baasha makes a bold, threatening move.
He fortifies Ramah. Tell us about Ramah. Why was this such a big deal?
Ramah was a town strategically located on the main road just about 6 miles north of Jerusalem. Think of it as controlling the northern gateway to Asa's capital.
So by building it up, making it a strong fortress.
Baasha was effectively creating a blockade. Verse 17 says he did it to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. It was an economic stranglehold and a direct military threat right on Jerusalem's doorstep, a genuine crisis for Asa.
This is a major test. How does Asa, the great reformer, respond to this existential threat? Does he turn to God?
Tragically, no. This is where Asa's faith seems to falter, where his previous zeal gives way to political pragmatism or perhaps fear. He doesn't call for prayer and fasting. He calls for the treasurer.
What does he do?
He takes all the silver and gold left in the treasures of the Lord's temple and the royal palace, the very treasures he might have recently replenished, and bundles it up.
Sacred funds dedicated to God.
Yes, and he sends it as a massive bribe, essentially, to Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, or Syria, ruling from Damascus.
Hiring a foreign pagan mercenary king with temple money.
That's exactly what it looks like. His message to Ben-Hadad is pure realpolitik. Look, there's a treaty between us, like there was between my father and your father. Here's a ton of gold and silver. Break your treaty with Baasha of Israel and attack him. Force him to pull back from Ramah.
So use God's money to incite one enemy to attack another enemy.
Yep. And Ben-Hadad, likely seeing a good deal weaken a rival, gain treasure, agrees. He launches attacks on Israel's northern cities, Abijam, Dan, Abel-Beth-Maacah, all of Kinnereth, and the territory of Naphtali.
And this forces Baasha's hand.
It does. Faced with a major invasion on his northern flank, Baasha has to abandon his Ramah building project and withdraw his forces to defend his own territory, likely back towards his capital, Tirzah.
So Asa's plan worked. The blockade is lifted.
Tactically, yes. Asa immediately mobilizes his own people. They go to Ramah and they haul away all the stones and timber Baasha had stockpiled there. And Asa uses those materials to fortify his own border towns, Jeba and Mizpah. From a purely military or political perspective, it was a successful strategy.
But spiritually, what's the assessment?
Spiritually, it was a failure, a profound one. He used sacred resources for political maneuvering. He placed his trust in a pagan king and foreign alliances rather than in the Lord, who had presumably given him decades of stability and success in his reforms.
He chose the arm of flesh, the Syrian alliance, over reliance on God.
Exactly. And while 1 Kings 15 states it briefly, the book of 2 Chronicles elaborates. The prophet Hanani confronts Asa later, condemning him precisely for relying on the king of Aram instead of on the Lord. It reveals a crack in his faithfulness, a turn towards self-reliance and worldly means when the pressure got intense.
It's a sobering reminder that past faithfulness doesn't guarantee future trust. Initial zeal can fade.
It really can, and it sets a precedent. This reliance on foreign powers, particularly Syria and later Assyria and Babylon, becomes a recurring temptation and ultimately a disastrous policy for both Israel and Judah.
The chapter ends by noting Asa's later years were marked by a severe disease in his feet, maybe gout or something similar. And Chronicles adds the detail that even in his illness, he sought help from physicians, but not from the Lord.
Yeah, suggesting that pattern of relying on human means over divine trust continued until the end of his life. He dies and is buried with honor in the city of David. His son Jehoshaphat succeeds him. A long reign, significant reforms, but ultimately a story of compromise under pressure. A very complex legacy.
Right, so we've walked through the reigns of these 4 kings, Abijam and Asa in Judah, Nadab and Baasha in Israel. 40-plus years of history packed into one chapter, filled with war, assassination, reform, compromise. Let's try to pull back and look at some of the deeper currents of emotional, psychological, theological.
Okay. Emotionally, you just have to imagine the background radiation of anxiety. A constant civil war between North and South wasn't just headlines. It meant raids, economic disruption, families potentially divided. Then you have specific traumas like the siege at Gibbethon or the blockade of Ramah. These create real fear and insecurity for everyone, not just the kings.
And you see different psychological responses in the leaders. Abijam and Nadab seem almost passive, just continuing the status quo, even if it's sinful.
Right, a kind of complacent inheritance of power and problems. Then you contrast that with Baasha. There's a chilling certainty there. He seems utterly convinced that his brutal actions, wiping out Jeroboam's line, are justified, perhaps even divinely sanctioned in his mind.
That cognitive dissonance we talked about, acting as judge while repeating the crime.
Exactly. It's a kind of psychological blindness, focusing only on the perceived legitimacy gained through violence, while ignoring the underlying spiritual principles. And then there's Asa.
His psychology seems more complex. Intense moral courage early on, especially with Maacah.
Definitely. Deposing the queen mother required confronting deep-seated traditions and powerful family ties. That takes real psychological strength and conviction. But later, under the pressure of the Ramah blockade, that conviction seems to crumble into fear-driven pragmatism. It shows how crisis can reveal underlying weaknesses or shifts in reliance.
Theologically, the main theme the writer keeps hitting is pretty clear, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's the Deuteronomistic history's core message. Obedience to the covenant, particularly the rejection of idolatry and loyalty to Yahweh alone, brings stability and blessing. Disobedience, especially embracing the kind of institutionalized idolatry Jeroboam started, leads inevitably to judgment, chaos, and destruction. Every king is measured by this standard.
And this chapter gives us examples of different types, almost archetypes.
It does. Asa particularly functions as a type of the reformer. He initiates genuine, courageous purification, getting rid of the shrine prostitutes, destroying Maacah's idol. It's a positive model.
But an imperfect one.
Right. His failure to remove the high places and his later compromise with Syria show the limits of human reformation. He's a foreshadowing, in a way, pointing to the need for a more complete, internal, divine cleansing that only Christ can ultimately bring. His story shows you can clean up the outside, but still have issues of trust and compromise on the inside.
And that reliance on Syria you mentioned, it's an allegory.
I think it serves as a powerful allegory of compromise. Taking the dedicated temple gold, God's resources, and using it to bribe a pagan king is a picture of any time we take the gifts, talents, or resources God has given us and deploy them according to worldly wisdom or fear, rather than trusting God's methods and provision.
Substituting human cleverness or financial clout for faith.
Precisely. It's the temptation to solve our Ramah blockades through manipulation, quick fixes, or leaning on powerful but ungodly systems instead of seeking God's deliverance through faithfulness. It's a timeless spiritual pitfall.
What about the unseen spiritual dimension? This isn't just human politics, right?
Not at all. The battle over Maacah's Asherah pole is spiritual warfare made visible. Asherah worship wasn't neutral. It represented allegiance to other spiritual powers, demonic influences trying to corrupt the heart of Judah, and, crucially, the Davidic line from which the Messiah would come.
So getting rid of that idol wasn't just smashing wood or stone, it was pushing back against a spiritual stronghold.
Exactly. It was a victory against syncretism and the spiritual forces trying to undermine God's plan. Asa's faithfulness in that moment had real spiritual consequences, contributing to the relative stability Judah experienced compared to the north.
And the flip side, Baasha fulfilling Ahijah's prophecy.
That demonstrates the power and efficacy of God's prophetic word. It's not just prediction, it's an active force shaping events. Even when fulfilled through the violent ambition of someone like Baasha, it shows God's sovereignty over history, ensuring his justice prevails and his warnings come to pass. Every political move, every resource used, becomes an act of allegiance in this larger spiritual conflict.
Okay, this is fascinating ancient history, but let's bring it home. How does this chapter, with its kings and conflicts from nearly 3,000 years ago, speak to us today? What's the modern relevance?
I think the lessons land in several key areas of our lives. Our personal integrity, our family dynamics, how we engage with culture, and even how we think about national well-being.
Let's start with individual integrity. What warnings do we take from Abijam and Nadab?
They're a stark warning against just going with the flow, against nominal faith. Having the right lineage or title means nothing if the heart isn't devoted. It's easy to inherit a system, even a religious one, without personal conviction.
And Asa. His story seems particularly relevant.
Hugely relevant. His initial zeal is inspiring, but his later compromise is a serious caution. It forces us to ask, where have I started strong in my faith or commitments, only to later rely on human systems or my own cleverness when things get tough? Have I cleaned out the obvious Asherah poles but left the convenient high places, those smaller, tolerated compromises, intact in my life?
The Ramah blockade moment facing a crisis is key.
That's the pressure point. When fear hits job loss, health scare, relationship breakdown, what's our default? Do we instinctively reach for the Syrian alliance, meaning worldly solutions, manipulation, maybe even unethical shortcuts? Or do we consciously choose to trust God's provision and guidance, even when it seems slower or less certain? Asa's mistake is using God's resources, the temple gold, to fund a worldly solution. We have to guard against doing the same with our time, talents, and treasure.
Let's talk family legacy. Maacah's influence is undeniable.
Yes, the Queen Mother's story powerfully highlights the impact of parental and ancestral legacy for good or ill. Maacah represents how deeply entrenched generational sin or harmful traditions can become right at the heart of a family.
So Asa's action against her.
It shows that sometimes true spiritual health requires making difficult, painful breaks with family patterns or expectations. It might mean confronting toxic attitudes, unhealthy dependencies, or inherited beliefs that conflict with God's truth. That takes immense courage, prioritizing covenant faithfulness over maintaining peace or approval within the family system.
Culturally, how do we identify today's Asherah poles or those repulsive images?
They're anything that demands our ultimate allegiance or promises fertility, security, or identity apart from God. It could be materialism, the pursuit of status, political ideologies that become all-consuming, addictive behaviors masked as entertainment, or societal values that directly contradict biblical ethics.
And Asa's response gives us a model.
It encourages us to have the courage to identify and dismantle these cultural idols in our own lives and spheres of influence. This isn't about being destructive, but about clearing space for true worship and allegiance. It means critically evaluating the narratives and demands our culture places on us and choosing differently, even if it means going against the grain, like Asa burning the idol in the public refuse dump.
Finally, the national level. The contrast between Judah and Israel.
It's a powerful illustration of how the spiritual health of leadership and the core allegiances of a nation impact its stability and destiny. Israel, founded on Jeroboam's politically expedient but spiritually rebellious act, experienced constant turmoil, violence, and rapid dynastic turnover. Judah, despite its own flawed kings, had the anchor of the Davidic covenant, providing a baseline of stability.
So the lesson for nations or even organizations today.
It suggests that foundational principles matter. When expediency, compromise with core values, or alliances based purely on power replace integrity and faithfulness to founding ideals, especially those aligned with divine principles, it ultimately leads to internal decay and instability. Spiritual health underpins lasting societal health.
Beyond the warnings, though, how can this deep dive into 1 Kings 15 actually encourage believers, people following Jesus today? Where's the good news in all this?
Well, the biggest encouragement, I think, comes straight from that central image, the Ner, the unbroken promise of the Lamb.
For David's sake.
Exactly. The fact that God preserved the Davidic dynasty, keeping that lamp lit through thick and thin, despite the failures of kings like Abijam and the compromises of Asa, is incredible assurance. It confirms that God's covenant promises, ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ, are unshakable. They don't depend on our perfect performance.
So our security isn't based on our consistency, but on his faithfulness to his promise.
Precisely. The messianic line was preserved because God willed it, guaranteeing the arrival of the true king. For believers today, it means the covenant we have in Jesus is eternally secure. Our failures don't extinguish God's grace or derail his ultimate plan for us. That's profoundly encouraging.
How does this translate into practical behavioral or mental renewal for us?
We need to internalize the lessons from Asa's mistakes. Yeah. When we face our own Ramah blockade, that crisis moment, we need a renewed mind, one that doesn't automatically default to fear and human schemes, the Syrian bribe.
So retraining our instincts.
Yes. Training ourselves to pause, pray, and consciously choose to trust God's resources. Faith, obedience, seeking his wisdom over our own cleverness, or the world's quick fixes. It's about resisting the urge to send the temple gold to solve problems God wants us to trust him with.
And finishing the job, not stopping at partial reform.
Right. The behavioral renewal involves aiming for consistency. Don't let initial enthusiasm for spiritual growth fade into comfortable compromise. Keep examining those high places in our lives, those areas we've mentally cordoned off from God's scrutiny, and allow him to complete the work.
What about the courage aspect? Asa facing Maacah.
That's huge encouragement for courageous confrontation. Believers need to know that standing for truth and spiritual purity, even when it means challenging powerful figures or cherished relationships, is not only right but possible. Asa's example gives us courage to identify the sources of compromise or idolatry in our own lives, families, or communities, and take decisive, God-honoring action, symbolically cutting them down and burning them in the Kidron Valley. It's about choosing integrity over comfort.
So wrapping this all up, we've journeyed through these 4 reigns in 1 Kings 15, Abijam's shaky start, Nadab and Baasha's violent cycle in the north, and Asa's zealous reform followed by compromise in the south. The core contrast seems stark.
It really is. You've got Judah, Imperfect, yes, with flawed kings, but ultimately experiencing continuity because it's anchored by God's unwavering covenant promise, that lamp for David, versus Israel, just constant chaos, coups, judgment, because its very foundation was built on institutionalized sin, on rebellion against God's revealed plan.
And the underlying lesson cutting across both kingdoms.
I think the ultimate lesson is that there's no neutrality. Every single decision, how you use your money, who you make alliances with, what religious practices you tolerate or promote, even within your own heart and home, it all counts. It's an act of allegiance, either towards God's covenant and his ways, or towards the world's power structures and compromises.
Which brings us to the challenge for you, the listener. When that blockade appears in your life, when Ramah is fortified against you and fear sets in, what's your first move? Are you tempted to take the sacred resources God has given you, your time, your talents, your money, and use them to bribe a worldly power for a quick fix?
Or are you choosing to rest, to rely entirely on the divine providence that has faithfully kept the lamp of hope burning through millennia, despite every human failing?
That really frames the choice clearly.
And maybe the final provocative thought to leave you with is this. Asa's story, his initial success and later failure, demonstrates something crucial. The true measure of spiritual health isn't just the initial zeal of our reforms or how well we clean things up when things are calm. It's tested in the fire.
In those moments of intense pressure.
Exactly. When the heat is on, do you default to human cleverness, political maneuvering, financial manipulation? Or do you rely, with perhaps frightening simplicity, on God himself to secure your future? That's the question 1 Kings 15 leaves echoing down through the ages.
A powerful question indeed. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.